Happy New Year and welcome to Transmissions Alt Mode, where we talk all comics and media related to the Transformers. In this week's show, we've got an interview that Darryl conducted with legendary comics writer and editor Jim Shooter. Shooter was editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time that Hasbro came to them looking for a partner to create the Transformers comics and cartoon. Enjoy this trip down memory lane.
Welcome to a special interview on Transmissions with Mr. Jim Shooter. We are here at London Comic Con, and I'm honored to be able to talk to you here.
Thank you.
And so I wanted to just really get into it really quickly here. You had a really big role in getting the Transformers, as a brand into the comics at Marvel. And what do you remember about getting that license with Marvel at the?
It wasn't exactly a license, and the way it happened was we had done G.I. Joe with Hasbro, and the way that happened was the president of Marvel and the president of Hasbro, Erwin Hassenfeld. They met at some charity event. They were talking to each other, and Hassenfeld said they were trying to restart some of the old brands, and they weren't exactly sure how they were going to do it, especially G.I. Joe. And so the president of my company said, well, you should let us do that for you. We have nothing but geniuses. He told me, they quoted himself to me later. I reported to the president. I was editor-in-chief, vice president. And so anyway, a meeting was arranged. We met with Hasbro. I gave them some foundation for what we might do. They loved it. And so we had it wasn't a license, it was a deal where we did the comics and animation. They did the toys and the licensing. And so I turned the project over to Larry Hama, who was one of my editors, and ex-military explosive ordnance expert, military historian.
You can tell.
And he killed it.
Yeah.
He took from the little foundation I gave him, he took it and ran. All right, so that was such a success that they loved us. And so the next time they had something, one of their executives, a guy named Bob Krupis, walks into my office. He has a shopping bag. He takes his car out of it, puts it on my desk. And I said, well, that's cool, And he goes, watch, flip, 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 flip. It's a robot. Flip, 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 flip. It's a car. I said, that's wild. Why does it do that? And he said, that's what I'm here to find out.
Okay.
So they had licensed the technology from Japan, from some company in Japan. But the Japanese really didn't have a lot of backstory, or there weren't any English names for the characters or anything. So I did the same thing. I wrote the sort of foundation story, Cybertron and the Wookiees and all that, and the war between the robots and all. And then I turned it over to this genius editor I had named Bob Budiansky. It was similar to Larry. He could write, he could draw. He was a great editor. He was a multi-talented guy. And he took it and ran, and he named all the characters, we'll call this Black, Yellow, and Bumblebee, and thought up their personalities and their powers, to find their powers and stuff. And it just did wonderful things. And just like Larry, he created characters like, I think, Circuit Breaker and some others.
Yeah, and got a couple in there for specifically to stick with Marvel.
Yeah, absolutely, and they used them. Yeah. So we had a successful history with Hasbro, and that's how it came about. In the same kind of deal. Yeah. We did the animation, the comics. They did the toys and the licensing.
Now, before we move on from that, there was a short pit stop before you got to Bob with Denny O'Neil. Right, because I have talked to Denny, prior, and he had mentioned there is a funny anecdote that he told me when I was able to talk to him. Unfortunately, he has passed since then. Yeah. But he had mentioned that you had asked him to do this Transformers book, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but he told me that you gave him he gave you a piece of paper where he had written "squeak, squeak, squeak, squeak" 500 times on it, and then he went on to write his version of Transformers, which he said, quoting, he said, "You really disliked."
Yes. Well, I don't know about the squeak, squeak, squeak part, but see, because that was successful.
Right.
I thought, well, this is something, Larry, he was well paid, but I thought we ought to start paying people to write these developments.
Right.
Not me. I'd do it for free. I was editor-in-chief.
Sure.
But so we had a couple other small developments and some film stuff, and I worked out a budget and was paying people. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of Denny's turn.
Sure.
I mean, because people like this. It was interesting and fun work, and it wasn't a great, huge amount of work, and it paid very well. So various creative people that work for me, editors and a few of the freelance people, I would hire them to do these development things. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of Denny's turn. Yeah. And Denny admitted that he had a disdain for toys. Somehow he thought it was more dignified to write Batman or Daredevil than to write about a toy. Right. Okay. So we had a little meeting, and I kind of, he really wasn't into it, but he was into having the paycheck.
Sure, of course.
And so I helped him with it. I fed him his lines. I said, well, how about something like this or that? And so he did, and he really, his heart wasn't in it. He just wasn't. So I read it, and it just was not good. I said, I can't give this to Hasbro, and I don't like it. Mm-hmm. So I'd already paid him, and I would have anyway. But so there's no more money in the budget. Yeah. So I did it myself. Right. So I wrote this treatment. The Hasbro people really liked it, and like I said, turned over to Bob Budiansky, who did care about it.
He did a fine job.
He did an amazing job.
He did a very good job.
He's really a brilliant guy.
The story that we keep hearing in the community is that early on in those days, the artists that would come onto the book, they were all used to drawing humans. Nobody really knew how to draw these robots, so you could tell that any interaction with human characters, the humans looked fantastic because they all were doing superheroes and whatnot. These robots just looked horrendous just because they just couldn't get the proportions and anything like that doing. So none of them really enjoyed drawing the humans or the robots. They always gravitated to these human characters because they could do them better. So Frank Springer and Don Perlin and some of those the earlier guys, the art kind of suffered in those early books because
they struggled with it. They did. These are great artists you just named.
Fantastic.
But they struggled with it. And because the robots you have to use templates of a lot of ruled lines and stuff like that. They take forever. Yeah. And so, but there were people who actually they liked that. They liked doing mechanical things. Herb Trimpe, for one. Right. Yeah. And I don't remember who else we had on Transformers, but we found people who actually got a kick out of it, drawing the robots. Yeah. And that was fine. It was a tough thing. It's just like G.I. Joe. I mean, Larry Hama on G.I. Joe was very insistent on everything being correct. The weapons had to be correct. The vehicles had to be correct. Now, when you're doing a vehicle, it's based on one of Hasbro's toys. Sometimes it wasn't as.
You got to exaggerate a little bit.
Yeah, it was exaggerated. But if anything was real military equipment, he wanted it right. Mm-hmm. So any cartoonist at Marvel, they were familiar with the comics, they could sit down and draw an issue of Daredevil, probably no problem, right away. Yeah. With G.I. Joe, you had to do your research first, and with Transformers, you had to have your templates and rulers handy. Yeah. So they were tricky, but I'll tell you, they were good, and they sold like crazy, and it was just big success. Mm-hmm. And I had so many people told me G.I. Joe was my first comic book, or Transformers was my first comic book.
From what I understand, I know an artist that's been working on the current G.I. Joe with IDW, and from what he's told me, Larry Hama is still to this day the exact same person. Oh yes, yeah.
I see Larry all the time, and he at conventions, and he's just a great guy, and he's an amazing man. Mm-hmm. But Larry, we had a really good crew, and most of the people there, a few cranky guys, but mostly they were really into it and thrilled to do it. One of the last times I saw Larry, we were talking about the old days, and he's not one to talk about personal feelings and stuff, But he said to me, I just couldn't wait to get to work every day. And I know exactly how he felt. Yeah. And so, there was a lot of passion put into these things. And I said, if we care about it, maybe someone else will.
Mm-hmm. Now, moving in from away from Transformers, because we're a Transformers podcast. I like to talk about that a lot, but you've done a lot more than just start a Transformers comic with Marvel. You've been in the comics industry for a very long time.
58 years.
It's famously you started off when you were 13, 14 years old. 13, and when you sent in the script for which is called One of Us is a Traitor for Adventure Comics number 346, which was, you corrected me yesterday when you said that was the first one published, but the second one written.
Yes.
Right? So that what compelled you to write that story? And then really, for me, where did you get the balls to send that in?
Well, it was desperate need for money. My family was struggling, and if you're 13 years old, they're not going to hire you at the local factory,
Right.
And delivering newspapers didn't cut it. So I was trying to think of what can I do, and I knew I was too young to get hired anywhere. So I thought, well, I've got to make something and sell it.
Okay.
And I loved comics, and it occurred to me somebody must get paid for creating these things, for writing and drawing and so forth. And so I actually spent a good bit of time studying comics, the ones I liked, the ones I didn't like, tried to figure out why do I like this one or I don't like this one, and tried to figure out what the MO was. And also I realized that the regular comics, they didn't do radical changes every issue. It was, Superman was pretty steady, and they might evolve over time, but they didn't. So I made it a point not to make any radical changes in my first couple of stories or anything like that. So I found out like what mistakes to avoid and what I thought would be that they like. Mm-hmm. And I picked DC because I thought I couldn't compete with Stan. I can't write as well as Stan, but I thought DC had some characters that they weren't reaching their potential. I thought the Legion of Superheroes, this should be great. Mm-hmm. And it's not. The covers are always nice, but the stories aren't as good. So I thought that's when I'll do it. And I sent in the first one, which is published. It was number 348. Mm-hmm. But I got a letter from the editor saying, "Well, this is interesting. You might have a future doing this. Why don't you send us another one?" So I sent him a 2-part story, 2-issue story. It's the first deviation from the norm I ever did, because usually it was all 1-issue stories back then. But I got daring, and because I knew Marvel did 2-issue stories sometimes, I thought, all right, I'm going to, throw everything I have at it. And that's when he called me up and he said he wanted to buy those 3, and he started giving me assignments. And I worked my way through high school, and it helped the family. And I don't understand why they published them out of order, but whatever. They published them.
They did a lot of one-shot stories. Mostly everything was one-shot stories at the time. So, being out of order, other than your 2-parter, it didn't matter, right?
Back in those days, you could read any DC comic series in any order. You could read 100 Superman stories in any order, didn't matter. Whereas at Marvel, they had continuity. Right. And in my Legion stuff, I asked my editor. I said, what about continuity? He said, we don't do that. And but I had the only series, the Legion of Superheroes. That was my regular book. I did other books too, but I did that every month for 5 years. And I realized that this is set 1,000 years in the future. It's the only book that's set 1,000 years in the future. I own the future, And so if I do my own started trying to do continuity in the issues of Superman I wrote, well, someone else is going to write an issue, and they don't want to be burdened with my continuity. So, but I was the only one writing Legion, and it was set in the future. So I thought I'd do my own continuity, and I did it. And the editor knew I was doing it, but I guess he reasoned the same way I did. Well, why not?
Why not?
And so I did continuity, and it worked. I think a lot of people seem to like that. Introduce characters, and then they turn up later. I introduced Shadowlass in the Hall of Fallen Heroes, and then a couple issues later, I had her join the Legion. And so people say, that's the character who's going to die.
You could follow the story.
Yeah, and they, so, you know, you could put little Easter eggs like that and stuff, and it was great. It was fun.
The moving into your time at Marvel as editor-in-chief, you created the Secret Wars crossover event, which was the big first crossover event for every line, which inadvertently made you the father of modern comics, I think, because every single year now, at least once, everything crosses over.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, it's sold so well. Everybody says, "Oh, well, let's do that
again."
You know,
yeah, and again, and again.
Yeah,
and so.
I will say this for me though. I mean, I had a really good crew and we worked really hard. And I said, I don't want this just to be some story set off to the side that has nothing to do with the continuity. Sure. I want it to be part of the Marvel universe, an important and part of Marvel history. And so we took great pains to make sure that when Spider-Man leaves in a red and blue costume and he comes back in a black costume and Secret Wars tells the story of how that came to be, I wanted to make sure that the guys picked up on everything that I left them. Mm-hmm. So I had to plan it all out way in advance. And most other companies, they just didn't want to work that hard, and they just had a bunch of characters off to the side and did a story.
Yeah.
And also, I tried to do it a different way every time. The first one, Secret Wars, fell between our December issues and our January issues. The 12 issues of Secret Wars took place between those 2 months. And then when I did it the second time, I did it contemporaneously with the regular issues, and I had the story sort of branch into some of the other titles. And then when I did it at Valiant, the crossover took place within the regular books. And then I was going to do it a different way every time, but I think a couple of things stuck around with the industry, which is the company-wide crossover and crossing with other companies, and also the branching thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because DC did that right away.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I knew it was a good idea.
It was a great idea. If only you had at the same time created implementing 15 different variant covers for every issue, you'd have been way ahead of your time.
I kind of, not me, but Marvel kind of started the variant thing. I had Peter Parker getting married to Mary Jane. Stan and I cooked that up together. And so it was a big debate in the office. A bunch of us sitting around debating this. Like, should it be Peter Parker and Mary Jane in her wedding dress, and maybe Aunt May and Jonah Jameson and other civilians standing in the background? Or should it be Spider-Man and Mary Jane in her wedding dress and villains and superheroes in the background? So we're all debating this, and finally Jim Salicrup, one of my editors, another really brilliant guy, he said, well, let's do one of each. He said, let's do both. And I said, you can do that? And he said, well, TV Guide does it. It must be okay. And I said, well, if TV Guide does it, I guess it's legit. Okay, fine. So we did two. With the direct market version had Peter Parker, and the newsstand version had Spider-Man. Because they figured kids on the newsstand probably look for Spider-Man, right?
Sure.
Because there's some younger readers who buy newsstand books. Anyway, so that worked, and of course, then people say, "Well, but now we have to buy two of them," and I'm like, okay,
Oh, that's a problem.
Well, yeah, I guess that is a problem, but I mean, I didn't feel too bad about it because we didn't do it all the time. We didn't do it again ever while I was around, and then later people realized, yes, you can make people buy two of these.
Yeah,
and they started doing 15 variants.
That's right.
I never would have done that. When I was at Valiant and everybody was going variant crazy, we didn't do variants.
Yeah,
we did some giveaway versions to retailers, but we made no money on them. We just did some like when I did the black cover, all black cover Dr. Solar books, they were all black cover. It wasn't a variant.
Yeah. The with regards to Secret Wars and stuff like that, a lot of your stories are getting picked up in the MCU now, the movies. Big, huge crossover events like that. Can you fathom them doing that justice? I
don't know. They're going to do Secret Wars.
Yeah.
They announced it. It's going to be 2025, and they say it's going to be based on the 2015 remake of
Right.
Secret Wars more than on my 1984 original.
Right, yeah.
However, they're using some of the same things I created back then, like the Beyonder and so forth. So it's got to have some. There have to be some things from my original series that will carry over. But I think the Marvel movies have really been pretty good, and there was some a little better than others, but most of them have been pretty good, and I think they know what they're doing. So I have high hopes that they'll do it right.
Now, as a Canadian, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Alpha Flight.
Okay.
The first appearing in X-Men 120 from 1979, and then going on to getting their own title in 1983. Was it essentially just based off of the success of X-Men at the time, or did you just let kind of John Byrne, being Canadian-based at the time, kind of go nuts and say, "Look, X-Men's doing well. Have a team based in Canada, and kind of go nuts." Where did you get the impetus for Alpha Flight? Because it did really well.
Yeah, it was in the X-Men when Claremont and Byrne were doing the X-Men together. They introduced Alpha Flight. A lot of that was John's creation, and it was good. It was great. And then later, when John left the X-Men, I don't remember exactly what he was doing at first, but he asked me if we could do an Alpha Flight book. I said, yeah, I think that'll be a good idea. The characters are good. It was introduced to the X-Men. People have asked about it. So I had a pretty free hand in those days. So I was able to pretty much do whatever I wanted, publishing wise. And so we put it on the schedule, and John did it for a while. Then he wanted to do other things. Somebody else did it. It went well for a while, and we introduced some interesting characters in there, and it's it's an essential part of the Marvel history, and they did a good job on it.
Yeah.
And John, I had a program where a benefit where if you created a title, right, and you did, I don't know, 3 issues of it or something, that ever thereafter you would get a 1% royalty.
Really?
On that title.
Oh, wow.
And if you created a character, you filled out a little form. It's called a new character creation memo or something. And then after that, you would get a percentage of the adjusted gross of the licensing revenues of that character. So John did pretty good on that.
I assume he did pretty well. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. Now, I want to move into just like the current state of the comic book industry, because obviously you've been around, in it for quite some time, and it's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
When you go into maybe a comic book store and you see a new release wall or something like that, can you recognize the books on the shelf anymore? Is it even resemble a comic book store?
Some of them. I mean, obviously, and I don't buy a lot of comics these days, but my friends who read comics a lot, they'll say, "Oh, you should read this," or "Don't read this."
Yeah.
Don't bother with this one.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll send me things or whatever, and I go to a lot of shows and stuff, and occasionally I pick up comics. But I'm really looking more at the indies, smaller companies now, and Image too. Image is sort of emerging as a force. They got some really
strong.
Interesting stuff. That Saga book they published. Wow. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I look at some books. I mean, for instance, the Miles Morales Spider-Man origin story. Several people said we should read this. I did. I gave up on about issue 4 when he still wasn't in his costume yet.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, I check things out once in a while. I even did some reviews on my blog of things like the New 52 and Miles Morales and all that. And I'm going to get back to the blog one of these days soon. And I might therefore start buying more comics to review.
Now, where do you see the industry going in, say, 5 to 10 years?
I think that the movies Who knows? I mean, maybe that trend will end, or maybe it'll keep going, and if they keep doing it well, it might, continue to be, prosperous and do well. The publishing right now is a disaster. It's I mean, the sales are ridiculously low. The prices are way too high. It's just, and also everybody who comes over here says, well, these used to be good, and now we don't even like to read them. I'm like, well, that's nice. You're standing at my table, so of course you're going to say that.
Right.
But I think it's true to some extent. I mean, I think that they stopped doing just entertainment, and they started. Marvel did a lot of social justice warrior stuff.
Yep.
Fine, but if you do it ham-handedly, it becomes propaganda.
Sure.
And nobody wants to read propaganda, even if you agree with every word in it. Mm-hmm. You don't want to. It's a lecture. Mm-hmm. And so they've kind of drifted off there, and they're not really concentrating on entertainment. And I think DC they've gotten kind of into cheesecake. I mean, it's the Sirens of Gotham,
right.
Birds of Prey, and Black Cat and all that. I think, like, hey guys, how about a good story? Tell a good story and tell it well. Like I used to talk to my guys, I care about it. Make it mean something.
Yeah.
Make people, when they finish that book, say, boy, I'm glad I bought this. And I had people like Louise Simonson, and Carl Potts, and they came at it with passion, and it showed. I'm not seeing the passion right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a bit of a shift happening, and it's unfortunate. There are some good stories out there.
No,
but
there's a lot of tremendously talented people, and there's some very good things. It's just that you can't have a few good things and then expect people to buy the rest.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, Marvel to some extent is kind of trying to do that. They say, well, you can have this one if you buy these other ones.
Right.
And they force you to buy stuff that you can't sell. Mm-hmm. And that's not good. I mean, why not just make good stories that people want to buy?
Yeah. No, and I think you're right with the independent stuff.
Yeah.
The people that are putting the books into independent companies that's where the passion is right now.
Yep.
Because they're the ones that are really the struggling ones trying to get stuff made.
Yeah. The passion is there. What is lacking with a lot of these guys, although they may be very talented, is training. Yes. They haven't been taught, and so they're feeling their way along. And some of them are doing fine, but I try to help when I can.
Sure.
And tell them not what I think, but all the things that I was taught by the greats that I worked with, Stan and Jack and Steve and Kurt Swan and Wally Wood and all those people. I listened to every word they said, and I wrote a lot of it down.
Of course.
And so I have the wisdom of the ancients, to pass along. Nothing I invented, just
your duty.
What I was. Yeah, exactly. Of course it is. I mean, Will Eisner did it. Stan did it. Jack did it. I'm trying to, pass along what I learned from them.
The last question I have for you, we're in an age right now where digital comics exist alongside physical comics. We were when they first started making their way into the industry, there was a real sense of dread for brick and mortar stores. Do you still see that? Is there still a place for the brick and mortar stores? Do you see a digital a world where comics only exist in digital in the future?
I guess that's possible. I don't know. I know that what the core business is storytelling. Storytelling, tell a good story, tell it well. That's a way to succeed, and it's been that way for the last 40,000 years, and it's going to be that way for the next 40,000 years. So, if it takes a different format or something, I'm okay with that. I, however, have a great deal of faith in print media. I know they always say, they're selling fewer books and people aren't reading and the kids can't read anymore and stuff like that. Yeah, but if something good comes along, when Jurassic Park comes along, everybody buys it, or whatever. Anyway, I mean, I think that the market is there for stories and for tell a good story. And I think that the print media stuff has advantages that the digital doesn't. One thing, I mean, people like the physical product. It's collectible. It's something that you can put things into that you couldn't do digitally, and that's what I would do. If I were doing digital comics, I would do digital comics that were made for digital, and then I would do print media comics that had extra things in them that you couldn't get online. And also, I mean, so many people, you're reading on a device with a screen that's shaped roughly like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so most of the places, artists are drawing these slanty panels and these crazy shapes and stuff. And so when you're trying to read it online, you're scrolling around because there's an edge of one panel poking into this panel, and there's an inset, and there's, this is how you do digital comics. Okay? You make the panels like that. It's a movie screen.
Right.
They don't change the size of or shape of the screen when you go to the movies.
Yeah.
You can do everything you need to do in this size. You could even divide it in two if you wanted to have two panels. And then you go like this. Flip.
Yeah.
That's how to do it.
Yeah.
So it's easy to read, and it fits the screen. And then like I say, you can do in print media, you can do all kinds of tricky things that wouldn't work on that very well. So I think there's a future for both. I mean, as always, it depends on how they do it and how well they do it and how smart they are about it. I have faith in this medium. I think this is an iconic medium. It's the only visual medium that's eyes only. It requires focus. It involves you. You're involved in the story. You have to do the in-betweens yourself. And I don't know. Love this meeting.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Shooter. I have enjoyed this time. It's an honor to have you here in London.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for listening. It's Jim Shooter, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. But then, after the mic was off, a question about a costume. And and I remembered something this morning as I was getting ready about the black costume, because it was the story is that you bought it from Randy Schuler for $220.
I didn't need his permission to do a black costume. What happened was he wrote a plot for a Fantastic Four story.
Okay.
And he was trying to get it, to be a writer.
Yeah.
And I think it was a kid at that time, and it wasn't. I mean, the story was whack. It was all over the place. And all this random stuff happens. Among the random things that happens, Spider-Man happens by the Fantastic Four building. I don't know. Okay. And Reed Richards gives him the quote black costume, and that was the entire description.
Okay.
I read that. I read this thing, and I thought, if you crawl around on the roof like that, wouldn't you wear black? And I didn't want to get. I did a black costume anytime he wanted, but I didn't want him to feel bad. So I called him up and I said, look, I don't think we're ready for prime time. I said, but I'll buy this black because I intend to do a black costume. So I don't want you to think and so he was I don't know how much it was, but he says that was what it was. I believe. Sure. But anyway, so we bought it. He was happy. I think even Tom DeFalco, talked to him and asked him and told him some things. And he said, if you want to try again, I'll read the story. It wasn't written.
Yeah.
So anyway, then I threw in my drawer, sat there for a year, just the part was the black costume. And
so there was no drawing.
No.
It didn't come. It was just
there was no drawing. It was 2 words. Yeah. Black costume. And so he says
the internet has ruined us.
He said he designed it, but
bastardized
he used a drawing by Mike Zeck to illustrate his design. No. Mike Zeck designed it. The thing is, I threw him the drawer. I didn't want to force it. I didn't want to micromanage all this stuff. I wanted the editors and writers to have make sure they didn't violate the character, screw it up. But I wasn't writing stuff, so I was I'll just sit there someday maybe. Then when I was doing Secret Wars, I was writing stuff. I said, okay, and I told the writer, I had a little Secret Wars planned out. I showed everybody, and I told the Spider-Man guys coming back and going costume, and they're like, well, what do you want us to do with that? You know, I said, anything you want. And they took it from there. I called Mike Zeck and said, I need you to design a black costume for Spider-Man. What do you want? And I said, you're Mike Zeck, figure it out. And he said, well, you want me to show you a sketch? I said, no, I trust you. You're really great at this. Just do it. You know? So he made exactly one design. That's what it is. Tom DeFalco was editing Secret Wars. I always had somebody, even when I was writing this box, I always had somebody to check it over. And so Tom realized that Mike had just gone front. And so he asked Rick and Artie to do what they call a turnaround front end. And so Rick did it, and he did it exactly the way Zach wanted it. But Leonardi was the one who did that drawing. I asked him, I said, did you talk to him? Did you get it right? He said, oh, yeah, he nailed it. That's perfect. And so some people think Rick created it. Some people think Ron Fringe created it. Spider-Man 252 was the first place it was. No, Mike Zeck created it 8 months earlier and designed it, and so it was there for everybody to use. So, but that's the whole thing with the black costume. And Randy's been dining out on that for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
But, no, I'm sorry, he did not design it. He didn't create it.
Yeah, no, it's this is funny. Whatever. It's one of those internet kind of things that's kind of gotten away. Whatever. Funny. I'll let you get your table going here. This was awesome. This was a pleasure, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transmissions. If you'd like to join the conversation, travel to our Discord channel at transmissionspodcast.com/Discord. Want some cool transmission swag? Feast your eyes on our transmissions gear at transmissionspodcast.com/shop. If you'd like to support our podcast, go to transmissionspodcast.com/support or tell your friends about our show. We'll see you next time.